This episode will be a little bit different from the other ones. Normally, I write for Game Masters and Dungeon Masters, but I've been seeing a lot of posts around asking about how to play D&D. I thought this was a good opportunity to break it down and give a step-by-step guide to the basics of playing D&D. We tend to forget if you've been playing for a while, but D&D can be quite overwhelming at the start. There are lots of dice, we use a lot of terminology, and there's a culture that can be intimidating to outsiders. D&D is one of those games that has a lot of general rules, but there are contradictions in certain situations. Even a fairly basic general statement will have situations where there are exceptions. I'm going to go into that a little bit more detail. So let's dive in. I'm going to go through the basic rules using D&D 2024 to get you started. Please keep in mind, I'm not going to go over every rule in D&D. Instead, I'm going to run you through a few examples, and you're going to see how the rules work in an actual play situation. Keep in mind there are other rules that will come up depending on the circumstances you're placed in. I don't want to overburden you, and this isn't a rules overview. It's an introduction on how the rules work. First things first, there are two types of roles people take at the table. The first are players. Each player controls a character, called a player character, or PC for short. The players control what they do, where they go, and so on. Each player has their own character. The other role is the Dungeon Master, or DM. They are responsible for all the other non-player characters, or NPCs for short. The DM plays a really important role in the game, overseeing the story, ruling on game mechanics, and determining the effects of player actions. This video is going to be a guide for players, so I'm going to be talking about what the DM does from the point of view of the players. Sometimes the players might control other things. These can include pets or summoned creatures. Sometimes things control the players, like mind control spells. These, though, are pretty rare. Now, sometimes I'll use the term creature. This is a term for anything that can move and act. It applies to monsters, PCs, and NPCs. I can't say the word living, though, because there are a lot of creatures that are undead or not technically living, like robots and constructs. But a creature applies to all of these. A good way to think about the game is to split it up into two modes. There's a combat mode and a non-combat mode. I'm going to run through a scenario and we'll see what the differences are. Generally, games won't start in combat. Instead, it'll start with the DM describing a scene and what is happening. The DM doesn't provide every detail, but they'll provide an overview of where you are, describe what's going on, and the important things that are around you. Sometimes they won't describe things because they don't think it's important, because the PCs might not notice it, or because they don't have time to describe every detail of the environment. So here's a standard D&D opening line that a DM might give you. The adventurers walk into the tavern, the sweet smell of cooking pork with the undertones of stale beer and smoke from the crackling fire. The tavern is small, with a few locals sitting at tables and chatting lightly. The tavern keeper is an older man with a thick beard and bald head. He nods to the newcomers and gestures towards one of the empty tables. Now, notice how I didn't say how many locals there were, or if there was anything kind of weird or unusual going on. After the DM has said their intro, now it's time for the players to act. There are no rules for who goes first or how long, but the DM will generally try to spread the action around so everyone has a turn. So let's say our DM has 3 players, Ash, Brett, and Beck. Ash speaks first, asking to see if anyone looks suspicious. When a PC attempts to do something with an unsure outcome, the DM will ask for a dice roll. This is sometimes called a skill check or an ability check, or just shortened to check. The player will roll a d20, the 20-sided dice, and then, depending on their character stats, they may add something to the roll. When we describe dice, we use shorthand. We say the letter D with the number of sides. So a 6-sided dice is a d6, a 20-sided dice a d20, and a 10-sided dice a d10. When multiple dice are rolled, the number of dice are put in front. So 2d6 means 2 6-sided dice. So the DM has a choice to make here, as Ash's character looks around. They could answer with a result, or ask Ash to make a check. In this case, the DM decides a check is needed, and asks Ash to do a perception check. On Ash's sheet, there are a list of skills. He looks down and sees that next to perception is a +4. Ash rolls d20, getting a 12. Then says to the DM, check is 16, or 12 plus 4. The DM will have a set number Ash needed to get, called a difficulty check, or DC. It might be higher or lower depending on how difficult it is. The DM then explains the result of the roll. In this case, the DM says to Ash, Ash, your character looks around, but everything looks like normal, nothing stands out. Ash then asks to go over to the bartender to talk. The DM chooses to get someone else involved. The DM asks Beck and Brett, "Are you two looking around as well?" They both agree, so the DM asks for both of them to make rolls as well. They both roll, adding in the bonus they get from their perception or perception modifier. They get a 22 and a 7. This time, the DM says something different. While Beck and Ash's characters do not notice anything, Brett, your character, notices that at the end of one of the tables is a goblin. He is dressed in a thick coat, and he looks like one of the townsfolk at first glance. But then you notice that people don't seem to be paying attention to him. He appears to have snuck in and is blending in with them. The DM brought the other two players into the scene. Now, Ash and Beck have failed their checks, so Brett's character is the only one that has noticed the goblin, and it's up to Brett to decide what he does. As players, Ash and Beck should pause and give Brett a chance to decide what to do. Sometimes, players struggle with this part, and it makes sense. You could do theoretically anything. You could speak to the goblin, ignore it, tell the other player characters about it. You could play it cool, watch the goblin, alert the townsfolk, alert the bartender, you could even shout goblin loudly and so on. If Brett is not sure, the DM may offer a few of these as options. Brett tells the other PCs, and Beck says her character speaks goblin, so she says loudly, as if speaking to the other PCs, "I wish there were a goblin to speak to," in goblin. The DM asks for a persuasion check. This means that she is trying to persuade the goblin. Beck rolls an 11, adds a 1 for her modifier, and gets a 12. The goblin quietly stands, moves around the tables, and sits next to the PCs. This time, a 12 was a success. The difficulty check, or DC, was lower than it was to spot the goblin. And that's how the basic flow happens out of combat. The players take turns doing things, the DM provides information, asks for rolls, and then responds to their actions, narrating the effects. The players control their characters, and if the outcome of one of their actions is uncertain, they roll a dice to determine the outcome. Now let's say that instead of Beck calling the goblin over subtly, Brett yells out, "Goblin, run for your lives, everyone!" The DM describes the townsfolk panic as they notice the goblin and fleeing towards the doors. The goblin also reacts, attacking the players. Now combat starts. The DM asks for the players to roll initiative, and the DM rolls for the goblin. Each of the players rolls a d20 and adds their initiative modifier. The roll determines the turn order. Before combat started, it was more free-flowing, but now there's a turn order and limits on what the players can achieve on their turns. The players roll their dice and add their initiative modifier, as does the goblin. The DM may choose to roll for the other NPCs, such as the townsfolk and bartender, but they may choose not to. It comes down to the personal preference and how they want to run combat. For now, let's say they don't. The 3 players rolled a 3, Beck an 11, and Ash a 15. The goblin rolled a 14, so the turn order then is Ash, the goblin, Beck, and then Brett. There are different ways this might be recorded. Sometimes the DM will use little cards on top of the DM screen. Sometimes they'll just write it down on a sheet of paper and keep a track that way. Regardless, Ash is going to go first. Now, Ash is limited to an action, a bonus action, and movement. There might be other things that they can do that don't count for any of these. For example, Ash could yell out, "Your doom is nigh, goblin fiend!" What exactly Ash can do with their turn is determined by their class, level, race, and any magic items they may have. But to keep it simple, we're going to say that Ash is playing a level 2 fighter, and we're going to ignore his race for now. Ash's PC draws their axe and moves towards the goblin. They can move up to 30 feet on their turn using their movement. D&D often uses maps with 1-inch squares. Each square represents 5 feet, so they can move up to 6 squares. Diagonal does not cost extra movement. They only need 15 feet to reach the goblin. 1, 2, 3. Ash's PC then attempts to hit the goblin with their axe. This is called the attack action. Ash rolls 1d20 and adds their weapon attack. Because Ash is a fighter and using a battle axe, they use their strength modifier, which for Ash is +3, and their proficiency, +2, for a total of +5. This is often simplified on Ash's character sheet as 1d20 +5 when he uses his battle axe. Ash rolls a 7, adds a 5 to get 12, and they announce the total to the DM. The DM has statistics for the goblin, one of which is something called armor class, often simplified as AC. For this goblin, their AC is 13. Ash needs to meet or exceed 13. Because their total was a 12, their attack misses. The DM describes this as the goblin ducking low, narrowly avoiding the top of their head. Ashes use some of their movement and their action. They still have a bonus action, but they decide not to use it for anything just now. Their turn ends, and now it's the Goblin's turn. The DM decides what the Goblin does. It also has an action, bonus action, and movement. And just like how the characters have their special abilities, so too do monsters and other creatures. In this case, the Goblin is a pretty simple creature. The DM chooses to move the Goblin away from Ash's PC. Normally, when a creature moves away from another creature during combat, the stationary creature can choose to attack them. This is a fourth type of thing creatures can do called a reaction. Reactions only trigger under certain conditions, and spells and abilities will specifically say that it uses a reaction. Creatures only get one reaction, which is regained at the start of their turn. It's normally used on other creatures' turns when something triggers it, hence being called a reaction. The most common reaction type is an attack of opportunity, sometimes called an AO. Ash's PC would normally get an attack of opportunity against the Goblin as it moves away, but the Goblin uses their bonus action to use something called Disengage. All creatures can disengage as an action, but some creatures and some classes can do it as a bonus action. When a creature disengages, it means that they don't provoke opportunity attacks. By using Disengage, the Goblin is able to move past any number of creatures without them being able to hit it. Think of it sort of like dancing around and dodging through the enemies. The Goblin moves away from Ash's PC and over to Beck. Now I haven't said what the other classes are, so let's make Beck a wizard and Brett a ranger. Beck therefore is physically the weakest of the three, and a smart creature can use that to their advantage. The Goblin places itself next to both Brett and Beck, and then uses its attack action on Beck. It rolls a 14, adds a 4, for a total of 18 to hit Beck. Beck's AC is 11, so the Goblin successfully hits. The Goblin is using a short sword, which deals 1d6 damage. When you damage a creature using a weapon attack, you will either add strength or dexterity depending on the weapon. In this case, the Goblin can choose which one, and it chooses dexterity. Because it has a +2 modifier to dexterity, it adds that to the damage roll, so now it becomes 1d6 plus 2. It rolls the d6, getting a 3, adds 2 for a total of 5. So Beck takes 5 points of damage and subtracts that off her hit points. Hit points represent the character's health. She goes from 14 health down to 9. The Goblin then ends its turn, and now it's Beck's turn. She has an action, bonus action, and movement. If she moves away from the Goblin though, she'll provoke an opportunity attack. Unlike the Goblin, if she uses Disengage, that will cost her her action. So instead she decides to try to attack the Goblin with a cantrip, Firebolt. This is what's called a magic action. For characters that can cast spells, they have a list of spells that they can choose from. Each class picks their list a little bit differently. All spells will have a casting time. Sometimes they're going to be actions, bonus actions, or reactions. Some spells even specify a time, such as 10 minutes. Firebolt is an action. Normally Beck would roll 1d20 and add 5. Spellcasters determine their spell attack bonus dependent on their class. As Beck is a wizard, she gets to add her proficiency, which is 2, and her intelligence modifier, which is 3. So normally Beck would roll 1d20 and add 5, trying to reach or get higher than the Goblin's AC. However, there is another rule. When a character makes a range attack and has an enemy within 5 feet, or in other words next to them, it's harder and they get disadvantage on the roll. Think of it like trying to shoot someone with a bow while they're swinging a sword around. If they're right next to you, it's much harder. So Beck's going to roll 1d20 twice and take the lower of the 2 rolls. This is what disadvantage is. She rolls a 12 for a total of 17, and then a 9 for a total of 14. She has to take the lowest, which is a 14, but luckily it's still higher than the Goblin's AC. So her PC lifts their hand, points it towards the Goblin, and manages to hit it with a Firebolt. Now she rolls damage, which for Firebolt is 1d10. She rolls a 5, and the Goblin takes 5 damage. Unlike weapon attacks, she doesn't get to add anything to this. She's going to end her turn there, and now it's Brett's turn. He draws his sword and attacks the Goblin. He is making a melee attack, so there is no disadvantage in the roll. His weapon is a rapier, which has a property called finesse. He can choose to use strength or dexterity with this weapon, similar to what the Goblin did. His strength modifier is 0, while his dexterity is +3, so he chooses dexterity. He rolls a 14, adds 2 for proficiency, and 3 for dexterity, which is also +5, so for a total of 19. New to D&D 24 are things called weapon masteries. Brett's rapier has one called Vex. Vex states that if you hit a creature with this weapon and deal damage to that creature, you have advantage on your next attack roll against that creature before the end of your next turn. Advantage is the opposite of disadvantage. Instead of rolling 2d20s and taking the lowest, you roll 2d20s and take the highest. But we're going to have to see if that triggers. A rapier does 1d8 damage. Brett rolls and gets a 2. He then adds 3 for his dexterity for a total of 5 points of damage. The goblin now has taken 10 points of damage from Brett and Beck. We have gone through the initiative order and we're back to the start with Ash. Ash moves towards the goblin and attacks again, but unfortunately they miss. They end their turn and it's back to the goblin. The goblin attacks Beck again, rolling higher than her AC and dealing 4 damage. The goblin then ends its turn. You'll notice that we're not using all the available options. You don't have to move on every turn, and you don't have to use your bonus action. Beck is now going to use her action to disengage. She moves away from the goblin, and to regain some hit points, she drinks a potion of healing, which is a bonus action in D&D 2024. She rolls how much to see her healing potion gets her. For a standard healing potion, she rolls 2d4 plus 2, so that's 2 4-sided dice and then adds 2. In this case, her total is 7. Her hit points go from 5 back up to 12. It's now Brett's go. He attacks with his rapier, and because of his weapon mastery Vex, he gets advantage. He rolls 1d20 twice, taking the higher of the 2. He rolls a 14 and then a 20. When a creature rolls a 20 on the dice, called a natural 20, it is a critical hit, and the creature rolls the damage die twice and adds them together. So instead of Brett rolling 1d8 plus 3, he gets to roll 2d8 plus 3. He rolls a 6 and a 4, adds them together, and then plus 3 for 13 damage. This is enough to reduce the goblin to 0 hit points, and with that, combat ends. But let's say things went a little bit differently. What if it was the goblin that rolled the natural 20 and got a critical hit? So let's go back to having Beck having 9 hit points. The goblin rolls 2d6 plus 2, rolls a 5 and a 4, plus 2 to deal 11. Now Beck has 0 HP. Her character falls to the ground and is unconscious. On the start of Beck's turn, she'll need to make what's called a death saving throw. Characters don't die straight away in D&D, while monsters tend to. Instead, they go unconscious, and players have a chance to bring them back up. So when you start your turn with 0 hit points, you must make a death saving throw. This determines whether or not your character creeps closer to death or hangs on to life. Unlike other saving throws, you don't add anything to this. You're just in the hands of fate. To make a death saving throw, you roll 1d20. If the roll is 10 or higher, you succeed. If it's 9 or lower, you fail. If you get 3 successes, your character stabilizes. It's still unconscious, but it's no longer at risk of dying. If you get 3 fails, though, your character will die. The successes and failures don't need to be consecutive. You keep track of both until you collect 3 of either. If you regain any hit points, or you stabilize, the numbers reset to 0. Now, if you roll a 1 or a 20 on the dice, something extra happens. When you roll a 1 on the d20 for a death saving throw, you suffer 2 failures. If you roll a 20 on the d20, you regain 1 hit point, and effectively wake up. Any damage you take at 0 hit points, you automatically suffer a death saving throw failure. If the damage is from a critical hit, you suffer 2 failures instead. Just to make it a little bit more complicated, if a character is unconscious and a character standing next to them hits them with a weapon attack, it's automatically a critical. So if the goblin was to hit Beck while she's lying on the ground, she'll get 2 saving throw failures. So Beck rolls her dice and gets a 7. She fails the save and records that she has 1 failure. So now it's Brett's turn. He's going to use his bonus action to give Beck a healing potion. The DM describes how he quickly pulls it from his belt, pops the cork, and pours it into her mouth. Brett rolls the dice, and she regains 6 hit points. She's conscious, but she's still lying on the ground. But for now, it's still Brett's go. He turns, strikes the goblin, takes it out, and ends combat. Once combat ends, the turn order ends, and the game goes back to how it was before combat. There are situations where the DM may keep the turn order. For example, if the building was on fire and the players were trying to escape. Or maybe they're exploring a tomb and they're trying to flee it as it collapses behind them. Back to our players. Ash asks to search the goblin. The DM asks for an investigation check. This time, Ash rolls a 19. The DM describes that the goblin was carrying items, the short sword, a dagger, and 15 silver coins. In addition to these, Ash finds a small piece of paper folded several times and placed in a hidden pocket. It contains the following: Watch Ash, Beck, and Brett. Death before discovery, and is signed DD. If Ash had rolled lower on their check, they may not have found the note at all, but now the party has a clue to follow. And so there you have it. That's the basics of D&D. Most of the game is players narrating what their PCs do, with the DM responding and controlling NPCs. Whenever something has a chance of failing, someone will roll a d20, and that'll help determine the outcome. This could be PCs or NPCs. Numbers that are added to these rolls are dependent on how good the creature is at the task. So if a creature is particularly skilled at something, they're more likely to succeed, but it doesn't mean they're going to succeed all the time. Now, I want to add a little bit here. As an important addendum, there are 3 golden rules that sit above the others. These set the context for the game, and if you watch people playing online, they'll sometimes do things that are not in the rules, or mention something that doesn't seem to be written anywhere. Some of these are explicitly stated within the rules. Other ones are things that people have picked up over time, and it forms part of the culture of running D&D. So Rule 1, tables can choose to use other rules. Sometimes these are called homebrew or third-party content. Homebrew is a shorthand for content that is not from an official D&D source. They can be rules, creatures, all sorts of things. Basically, anything that was created or brewed at home. There are lots of these, and some are used so often that people assume they're in the normal rules. In D&D 5e, so many tables allowed potions as a bonus action, it was implemented in the 2024 update. The next rule is important for understanding how D&D rules operate overall. The specific rule overrides the general rule. For example, Disengage requires a creature to use their action. However, we saw that the Goblin used Disengage as a bonus action. The Goblin has text written on their stats that says the Goblin can use Disengage or Hide as a bonus action. So that's the specific. It applies to the Goblin, and therefore it overrules the general rule. There are actually quite a lot of these. There's lots of general statements that are then contradicted by specific statements. Keep that in mind as you try to wrap your head around some of the more complex rules. The more items you have, the higher level your characters are, the more of these overriding rules come in. And the third rule, probably the most important, is be respectful of each other. This is also sometimes called the don't be a jerk rule. This comes in many forms. Outside of combat, let other players have their turn. Don't force other players to do things they don't want to. Give them agency. Don't tell other players how their characters should act, or that they're playing the game wrong. Work and support the DM, not against them. I could go on. In the end, it's about understanding the people around you and being respectful. Sometimes you might find yourself on a table where people are playing a certain type of game that you don't like, but they seem to be having fun. It might just be you need to step away from the table and find another one. That's okay. So I'm going to wrap up the episode there. Thanks for listening to this episode of GMspiration. Don't be afraid to dive in, ask questions, get it wrong, but most importantly, remember to have fun.